What's up, YouTube? Today I wanted to talk about testing. What I test, how often, which tests I'm using. I just made a video about 3 biggest parameters that you guys should be testing, and those are temperature, salinity, and alkalinity. So go and check that one. There's a video on my channel. I'll tell you how often I do it and how I do it. This is just one of my tanks. I do have one more system in my living room with mostly Montiporas and some other SPS and LPS corals. I just want to tell you guys that just so you kind of know what I have going on. My temperature is taken care of by my heaters and my temp controller and my Neptune Apex in the other tank. My salinity is taken care of by Tanzi ATO. I do check it from time to time with my refractometer. I do usually check it just before I do my water change. I don't usually touch it anywhere between because my ATO is keeping it pretty stable. I do check it with HANA salinity checker as well. In my other tank, the Neptune Apex will check that for me all the time. Keep an eye on that. I do my water change. I try to match the temperature and salinity. Sometimes test alkalinity, it depends which tank I'm doing water change. So let me talk first about alkalinity, since that's the parameter I test the most. Again, in this tank, not as much, but if you have any of the hard corals, if you're dosing it, if you have it on the dosing pump especially, I suggest for you to test it twice a week, because there's always little issues that pop out. Either your pump goes bad or something gets clogged or you're just out of the reagent and you haven't looked at it. So I suggest, if you can, get the HANA alkalinity checker or any other test that you can do that it's reliable and easy to do. The more easier test is to do, the most likely you're going to do it. The next that I test the most are phosphates and nitrates. And I test those at minimum every other week, but usually I test them every week. You're going to make sure that your phosphates and nitrates are stable range while we're testing it. So if you have high phosphates or nitrates, you might want to stop feeding as much or do water change. Or if you have a skimmer, just skim more wet. Or if you have a refugium, just ramp up that lighting a little bit more. There's lots of ways you can deal with that. Or if you have low, you can lower that refugium lighting, or you can skim a little bit more dry. You can feed more. There's more ways you can manage your phosphates and nitrates. That's how I'm doing it, and I'm testing my nitrate with NIOS test kit. And for phosphates, use my HANA phosphate checker. Let me mention calcium. Calcium I don't test at all on none of my tanks, because I do those just Kalkwasser and all for Reef, and both of those solutions have alkalinity and calcium equal amounts. If you're dosing calcium separately, I suggest for you to test it. The other things we test in our tanks is magnesium. I test magnesium not as often. In this tank I don't test it at all, but in my mixed reef tank I test it once a month. I actually forgot to mention where I like to keep all my parameters at. So my salinity, I like to keep it as 1.026, 1.025. My temperature around 78, 77. My alkalinity around 8, 8.5. Phosphates anywhere between 0.03 and 0.1. Nitrates anywhere between 5 and 15. Again, some people keep it lower as well. Some people keep it a little bit higher, but that's kind of safe range where I like to keep it. Magnesium to keep it a little bit high because I have in the other tank lots of Montes, so above 1400 is usually good for Montes and LPS corals as well. Calcium, my calcium usually pretty high, around 480, but people I know they keep it a little bit lower, but that's where mine sits at every single time I test it. I do test 2 more parameters. Those are iodine and potassium. I notice after starting dosing potassium nitrates that my zoas started to puff up way more. They like that little bit higher potassium. Again, potassium, where it tests in my fresh salt mix is around 410, 420. I use saltwater test kit. I know none of the potassium or the iodine test kits are the greatest, but they kind of tell me if I'm low or high, so I know what I'm doing. Again, my fresh salt mix tests potassium around 410, 420. I like to keep it a little bit higher, so between 420 and 450. My tank seems to like that. Iodine, as long as it's not on 0, I'm totally fine with it. I've heard lots of people overdosing iodine, so that's a big problem. That seems to be a problem when I don't dose it. So I'm just trying to keep it in that steady minimum level. I always remind myself, if there's a dude in the desert and he desperately needs a little bit of water will go a long way. So that's how I'm kind of looking on iodine. I'm testing it once a month. I'm adding very little. As long as I'm not on zero, I'm happy, and I'm trying not to overdose it. Again, that saltwater iodine test kit, it's a good test kit, but it's very hard to read. If there's any better one out there, you guys let me know for sure. Check the other ones, but that's the one I'm using currently. That's about it. If you guys like the video, like and subscribe. Would like to support the channel, check the description down below, and see you guys in the next video. Bye.